Hi, this is Mrs. Baxter, and today we are going to continue our unit of statistics talking about various sampling techniques. Now, most of you are probably thinking, what in the world is she talking about? Well, sampling techniques are important to talk about because in the real world, you may have heard something like, oh, 9 times out of dentists recommend Colgate toothpaste. Trying to say that it is the best toothpaste out there and you should use that over, say, Crest or some other brand of toothpaste, okay? Now, for me, I think of it and I know sampling techniques and I know bias and I'm like, well, who actually did this study and how did they get this data? Okay, where did they get the information from? How reliable are the sources? Okay, because we all know, or if you haven't heard, there's a saying that says statistics lies. We can make the data do whatever it wants. You will see a lot of this when it comes to politics, when it comes to advertising, okay? Sometimes when it comes to any kind of survey that wants to help show you why you should choose something over another thing. You will also be concerned about statistics and how we sampled, especially when it comes to research. Okay, we want to be doing research on, say, medicine, and we want to know the best medication, whether it's actually working or not. So we're not going to get too in-depth in this, but it's important to be aware of how data is collected and if it contains any kind of what we call bias or not. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So there are different ways to collect data, all right? So we're going to talk about sampling techniques or ways to sample or collect data. So the first way that a lot of people do it is they actually use data that already exists. Use data that already exists. Okay, so what kind of data am I talking about? Well, it could be data that's in a book already, something that's been published, or, for example, a newspaper, okay? Or even other research or other research studies, okay? So, for example, published data might be, we look outside every day and we're wondering, well, what's the weather like? Well, I know that in class we may have talked about this where we said, well, what is the average temperature for January? Well, we don't know unless we look at data that already exists. So we have to look at last year, the year before, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Okay, so this is published data that already exists. All right, an observational study. Well, think about what the word observation means. It means to kind of look, right, and watch. So what we're doing is we are watching naturally occurring events, things that just happen, occurring events, and record the data. If you guys want to write down any examples that I use, feel free, okay? So, for example, we just use the weather, right? We're looking outside. Well, what's going on today? Is it cloudy, overcast? What's the temperature? I'm looking, is it windy outside? Another thing, naturally occurring events. When we do an observational study, we do a lot of it in education, where we are observing behaviors, for example, okay? What happens when a teacher does this? Oh, students react like this. Okay, that would be an example of an observational study. An experiment. Okay, well, you guys know what that is. When we conduct an experiment and collect data. So I know most of you probably had biology, some of you have had chemistry, and when you go in there, you do an experiment and you're actually writing down, oh, what did I observe? What happened? Okay. That would be conducting an experiment and then collecting the data. A lot of research, as we talked about earlier, looking at medicine, for example, or vaccinations, or physical therapy, for example. Well, if we do this experiment, what actually happens? Let's write down the numbers. And then lastly, you might experience seeing or get a sampling technique called a survey. So in this instance, you guys know what a survey is. It's when we just ask questions of a group of people and record the data. Now, this is kind of interesting. Since I left the military years ago, I have been part of a very long study called the Millennial Cohort, and they every year reach out, or every 2 years reach out and ask me to complete a survey on my health. Okay, so they are doing research on military members, and all kinds of data is being collected from that, okay? So that is something I agreed to way back when, and something that I continue to help support. Okay, so suppose you want to survey students about their choice of radio stations. I don't even know if you guys listen to radio stations anymore, but they exist. All students make up what we call the population. Okay, so like the population of Batavia, the population of our school would be all the students that make up our population that we want to survey, okay? A sample is just some portion of the larger group. So we're taking a sample of students, a smaller group, smaller portion from the entire school, this entire population, okay, that you select to represent entire group. Okay, so then we go a census. I don't know if any of you have heard of that before, but a census would be a different kind of survey in which we would include all the students within the population, okay? So a sample is just a portion, okay? So let's see here, I'm gonna highlight this. A sample is just a portion, and a census is all the students, okay? A random sample of a population is selected so that it is representative of the entire population. So, for example, a random sample, it is random. I don't know who is getting picked out of the population, but it's going to be from, say, all the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. I am not going to just say, oh, I'm just going to sample freshmen out of this population. No, I want a random sample of the entire population of students, which would include freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. Going back to the word sample, something that a lot of students and people forget about is, so I'm going to use a different example. So when I go to Graham's Chocolate, like my favorite place for chocolate, I want to go in there and I see the huge display of chocolates, and my mouth is watering. I'm like, ooh, that looks good. That looks good. That looks good, right? And I go in there and I go, ooh, I would love to have a sample. Well, how many pieces do you think they're going to give me? Well, they may give me like 1 or 2 samples, right? But the population I could choose from is the whole display case with all of the chocolate. Okay, so when you think of the word sample, think about, ooh, which chocolate does Mrs. Baxter want to sample? She's only going to get maybe 1 or 2 of them, okay? Same thing like when you go to Costco or Sam's Club and they give you those samples of food, right? You want to eat all of it or try all of it, but by the time you get halfway through, you may be full. You might not be able to get it. So you haven't sampled all of them. You've only sampled a portion of the whole population of food, okay? All right, so let's move on here. Let's look at different types of random samples. Please note, I'm going to show you random sample, random. So the things that are different about this are the words simple, stratified, and systematic. And I'll break these down for you. All right, so when we're talking about this, though, we also need to talk about the word bias. And the word bias is not in here, but note that bias is when something is considered with Well, a random sample is unbiased because each unit is selected without favoritism. So bias means there's some kind of favoritism going on, okay? And we'll talk about that on the next page. What I want you to know is that all of these here are unbiased techniques, okay? These are all unbiased samples, okay? So these three all go together, and you'll understand more as we go through this. But when I look at a simple random sample, it means a sample that is as likely to be chosen as any other form from the population. Ooh, I'm having trouble reading today. So to put it more specifically, this one, when you see it in writing, you're going to see the word random pop up. Okay, it's like when you have a bag of marbles and we put our hand in the bag, do we know what we're going to pull out? No, it's very random. Okay, it could be blue, it could be red, it could be green. We don't know, okay? And the red one could be chosen just as easily as the blue one. It's totally random. Kind of like when you play bingo, right? You don't know what you're going to get. It's totally random. All right, the next type of sample is called a stratified random sample. Now, this is a little bit different because some of the keywords is the population is first divided into similar non-overlapping groups. So, similar non-overlapping groups. From there, a simple random sample is then selected from each group. So, going back to our high school students, our population, perfect example of that is before with a simple random, we're going to randomly choose a student, right? So you could say randomly choose BHS student. But with a stratified random sample, now I'm going to create different groups. Well, in high school, we naturally have 4 different groups. We have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And then from there, I'm going to randomly sample 5 freshmen, randomly sample 5 sophomores, 5 juniors, and 5 seniors. And all of those samples are random within each of those groups, okay? We'll look at more examples later, but another one might be I want to test soil in a garden. So I'm going to divide out my 1 acre plot or whatever, however big my garden is, and say, okay, this section here, I'm going to sample 3 times. This section here, I'm going to sample 3 areas of dirt, so on and so on, okay? All right, and then our last type of sample is called our systematic random sample. When you hear systematic, what does that word sound like? If you said system, you would be correct. So with a system, there's a specific order or a certain thing that has to happen, right? So first, then this. So in a systematic random sample, the items are selected according to a specific time. They've decided this ahead of time. So there's a specific time or item interval. So what that means is, say for, I want to survey students on their favorite lunch item. So I've already decided every 2 minutes that when that timer goes off, whoever walks in the door at the beginning of the school, I'm going to ask them what their favorite lunch item is. Okay, so every 2 minutes, it doesn't matter what year they are, just matters they're a student at BHS, and first minute I take this, after 2 minutes I take another student, after 2 more minutes I take another student. Okay, another example would be like, oh, okay, I've got I don't know, boxes of cereal on the assembly line, and I want to do quality control and make sure that all my boxes are exactly the same, okay, that there's no errors or malfunctions occurring on the assembly line. So I will tell my inspector, okay, I want you to systematic random sample these boxes, and I want you to check every 10th box. Okay, so we're gonna check, every say 10th student that walks in the door. Let's keep it to students. Every 10th student that walks in the door, okay? Every 10th widget on the assembly line. Every 10th book that comes into the library, okay? Those are examples of unbiased random samples, okay? All right, so now, hang with me. Now we're switching over to what we call biased samples. Ooh, this is a little bit different because there are two kinds, but random samples, here's where I was kind of going before. Random samples are the unbiased, right? Hold on. Random samples are unbiased, okay, because it's selected without favoritism. But a biased sample, so let's write that in here. A biased, ooh, I don't want that color. I want this color. A biased sample is one in which one or more parts of the population is favored over the other. When you hear that, do you think that the survey results are going to be accurate? Keep that in mind. Keep that question in mind, because I'm going to give you some examples and you're going to see in your head and you're going to go, oh, these aren't really good samples of data, okay? So for example, these are both biased, if that will help you, because you're going to use your notes and refer back to these to help you make a decision on what types of samples there are on the homework, okay? The first one is a convenience sample. What do you think the word convenience means? Well, convenience, like you think about convenience store, or that was convenient when something happens, right? Where you, I don't know, when the bread comes already sliced for you, that's convenient, right? Makes your life easier, okay? So a convenience sample, the definition is that it includes members of the population that are easily accessed. Okay, so let me give you an example. Say I want to do a survey on who loves math, okay? And what do I teach? I only teach math classes, okay? So I'm thinking to myself, all right, you know what? I'm just gonna survey my own classes. That's gonna be easy, right? Do you think that you're going to get some sort of data that's actually going to reflect the entire population at Batavia High School? Do you think students are going to be more likely to like math or less likely to like math? We're thinking high school here. So if we're honest, and if I was doing this in person, most of my students in high school are like, ooh, I don't love math, right? So when I put my data out, it's going to say, oh, most of the students at Batavia High School do not like math, right? So an example would be like surveying only Mrs. Baxter's math class. Okay, instead of, say, randomly choosing out of a hat different students at Batavia. Okay, now here's where this data changes. If you go to college where, say, students are there to get a math major and study math, if we were to go to all of them and say, oh, do you like math? What do you think they're going to say? That is definitely going to change the data that comes out, right? Because they're all going to say, oh yeah, I love math. My classes are hard, but yeah, math is great, right? If you surveyed only the math teachers at Batavia High School whether they like math, what do you think they're going to say? Oh yeah, math is the best subject ever. So that is a convenience sample. You're going to sample people where it's convenient to the researcher, okay? Now, a voluntary sample, the next one here, it involves only the people that want to participate, all right? So here's a great example. You're at the mall. Have you ever walked by and somebody's holding a little survey thing? And you're like, oh, excuse me, would you like to take our sample? And a lot of times I say no. I'm like, oh, sorry, I'm busy, right? And I walk away. So only the people that want to participate in the sample are going to participate. I know your parents have probably gotten phone calls, and for example, it is a political season, right? And so there's somebody from the national blah, blah, blah party calling to see if you are going to support their candidate. So what do you think their results are going to tell them? Well, it's a little bit biased, right? This is going to be favoritism right here, because they're only calling the people that will, one, voluntarily answer, which is usually the people who are part of their party, right? So be careful. This is where it's important for you to know. Be careful where the information comes from and who did the surveying and how they collected the data. Let's see. So let's do, you can just write person at the mall asking to survey. Okay, that would be an example of somebody who wants to or doesn't want to participate. All right, so let's look at some examples. I know I've given you some, so maybe there are some down here, but something to note. When we give you your quiz, please know we are going to give you this information. So we say identify, here I'm going to go along here, identify each sample, suggest a population from which it was selected, and state whether it was unbiased or biased. Okay, so we're going to tell you what, unbiased or biased. But here's the cool part, is if it's unbiased, remember these are your 3 unbiased. If it's biased, here's your 2 biased, all right? So I shouldn't see, oh, it's unbiased but voluntary, or it's biased but stratified, right? These are all together, and these will be all together. So make sure you're reading and then using your notes. All right, so the local newspaper asks readers to write letters stating their preferred candidate for mayor. Okay, first of all, sometimes I like to go, oh, is it biased or unbiased first? It's up to you how you feel like you can do this, but my question is, all right, so we've got a local newspaper asking readers to write letters stating their preferred candidate for mayor. Well, first of all, readers have to be reading the paper, okay? And then those people have to write a letter. So if you're thinking biased or unbiased, what is your gut saying? My gut says, ooh, this one is a little bit biased. And if I'm going to look at the biased, is it going to be convenience or voluntary? Well, the readers have to decide that they're going to participate in this survey. So this would be a voluntary response, a voluntary sample. Here I'm going to say voluntary sample. Okay, so the readers have to do this on their own, of their own volition. All right, so the next one is a hardware store wants to assess the strength of nails it sells. Store personnel select 25 boxes at random. Ooh, this is a word I like. From among all of the boxes on the shelves. From each of the 25 boxes, they select 1 nail at random and subject it to a strength test. Well, first of all, the word random here twice tells me that this is unbiased. Okay, so looking at both my random, stratified, and systematic. Okay, remember here, I'll go up here a little bit. We have simple, stratified, and systematic. I'm gonna go, well, it's not simple because they're selecting 25 boxes at random, but then from each of the boxes, they're selecting 1. To me, that's not systematic because they're not saying I'm picking every 25th box and every 5th nail. Okay, they've grouped each into different boxes in different groups. So in this case, this one is stratified sample. Okay. All right. Just 2 more really quick. I know this is a long lesson, so thank you for hanging in there with me. So the third example, a class advisor hears complaints about an incorrect spelling of the school name on pencils sold at the school store. The advisor goes to the store and asks Namid to gather a sample of pencils and look for spelling errors. Namid grabs the closest box of pencils and counts out 12 pencils from the top of the box. She checks the pencils, returns them to the box, and reports the results to the advisor. What do you think Namid did? What sample strategy did she use? So I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, Nabid, she just grabs the closest box of pencils and counts out 12 pencils from the top of the box. Did she randomly choose anything? I don't see random anywhere in this. So we are thinking this is definitely a biased sample, okay? So going back to biased, think to yourself for a second, is this going to be a voluntary? Did the pencils volunteer? Or was it a convenient sample? She just picked the easiest pencils to grab. If you said convenient, you would be correct. Convenient sample. She just grabbed the 12 closest pencils from the first box that she saw, okay? All right, and then lastly, pieces of paper with the names of 3 sophomores are drawn from a hat containing identical pieces of paper with all sophomores' names. Now, on this one, it's a little trickier because I don't see the name or the word random on here, but I see that the names are drawn from a hat containing identical pieces of paper with all of the sophomores' names. So we're not just like grabbing sophomores out of a class, right, or the first sophomores we see. We're actually pulling sophomores out of a hat. So like the marble example I gave earlier. So in this instance, this is going to be an unbiased sample. There's no favoritism involved, okay? And there's no system, right? There's no stratification of any of the information. So this is just going to be a simple random sample. Okay. All right. So that was a lot of information. I know. Use your notes. There's going to be a homework assignment with lots of different examples. Get with a partner, get with me or your teacher, whatever you want to do. And then work through each of these. Think about unbiased or biased, and then use your charts to figure out which type of sample it is. Okay. You guys got this. Bye.